What happens when a superpower collapses overnight? This is not just a question for historians or political scientists. It is a question that shaped the lives of millions. It redrew the map of the world. By the late 1980s, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics was an empire in a state of terminal decline, even if few inside or outside its borders could admit it. The economic engine that had once powered a global superpower was sputtering, choked by decades of rigid central planning. Factories, once symbols of industrial might, were producing outdated goods that nobody wanted. The vast agricultural collectives consistently failed to feed the nation. The system was simply not working. Basic goods, soap sausage and the sight of long, patient lines snaking outside state-run stores, became a daily symbol of systemic failure for millions of Soviet citizens. Into this atmosphere of decay stepped a new kind of Soviet leader, Mikhail Gorbachev. His policies were revolutionary for their time. Glasnost, or openness, was intended to loosen the state's suffocating grip on information and public discourse, allowing for a level of criticism that had been unthinkable for generations. Perestroika, or restructuring, was an ambitious attempt to reform the stagnant command economy. Gorbachev's goal was not to destroy the Soviet system, but to save it. As he stated, "If not us, who? If not now, when?" But in opening the floodgates of debate and reform, he inadvertently revealed the profound weaknesses of the very foundations he was trying to repair. The pressure was not just internal. The Soviet Union's vast sphere of influence in Eastern Europe, held together for 40 years by military force and political intimidation, was beginning to crumble. The Sinatra Doctrine, a joking reference from a Soviet official indicating that satellite states could now do it their way, replaced the old Brezhnev doctrine of intervention. Throughout 1989, a wave of peaceful revolutions swept across the Eastern Bloc. The single most powerful symbol of this new reality was the fall of the Berlin Wall on November 9, 1989. It had physically and ideologically divided a continent for nearly 3 decades. Its sudden, almost accidental opening was a televised event that captivated the world. Jubilant crowds streaming through checkpoints, families reunited, young people chipping away at the concrete with hammers and picks. Those images signaled the definitive end of an era. The Cold War was effectively over. For the Soviet leadership, it was a profound strategic defeat. The momentum of 1989 carried into the USSR's internal politics. As the external empire vanished, the internal one began to fracture. Boris Yeltsin emerged as a powerful rival to Gorbachev. He championed Russia's sovereignty and a new democratic future. In June 1991, Yeltsin was elected president of the Russian SFSR. Suddenly, there were 2 rival presidents in the same city, Gorbachev and Yeltsin. The center could not hold. In August 1991, hardline officials launched a coup. They placed Gorbachev under house arrest and declared a state of emergency. But they misjudged the public mood. Thousands poured into Moscow's streets to defend democracy. Yeltsin stood atop a tank outside the parliament to denounce the coup. The coup collapsed in 3 days, shattering the Communist Party's authority. The failed coup accelerated the breakup. Republics declared independence one by one. On December 25, 1991, Gorbachev announced his resignation on television. The Soviet flag was lowered from the Kremlin for the last time. The Russian tricolor was raised in its place. The Soviet Union had ceased to exist. The world changed overnight, and a new, uncertain era began. To understand the world we live in today, on October 16, 2025, we must return to that moment of seismic change. The narrative unfolds in 3 distinct acts. Act 1. The dramatic, rapid implosion of a system that once seemed permanent. An empire that spanned 11 time zones. The end of the Soviet Union was not the end of history, but the beginning of a new and chaotic chapter for Russia. The 1990s, under Yeltsin, were a period of radical and painful transformation. The immediate challenge was to dismantle a 70-year-old command economy and build a market-based system from scratch. The method chosen was shock therapy, rapid liberalization of prices, mass privatization of state-owned industries. The result was economic vertigo. Prices for everyday goods skyrocketed, wiping out the life savings of millions. Hyperinflation made the ruble nearly worthless, plunging vast segments of the population into sudden poverty: doctors, scientists, teachers. This upheaval created a power vacuum. Into that vacuum stepped the oligarchs. Through controversial loans for shares auctions in the mid-90s, politically connected businessmen acquired control over Russia's assets: oil, gas, metals. Boris Berezovsky, Mikhail Khodorkovsky amassed staggering fortunes. Their wealth translated into political influence. They bankrolled political campaigns, controlled major media outlets, and treated the weak Russian state as a tool for their own enrichment. The political landscape was as turbulent as the economic one. President Yeltsin governed erratically and sometimes authoritatively. In October 1993, a bitter struggle between Yeltsin and Parliament culminated in a constitutional crisis. Yeltsin ordered the army to shell the Parliament building. Over 100 people died. A chilling message about fragile democracy. The state's weakness showed in its inability to control territory. 2 brutal wars in Chechnya, costing tens of thousands of lives and draining resources. Throughout this period, Russia was heavily reliant on and influenced by the West. International Monetary Fund, IMF, provided billions in loans. The World Bank provided loans too. Western advisors arrived in Moscow promoting free market capitalism. Some policies were well-intentioned, but often implemented without regard for Russia's history and social context. For many Russians, this era meant national humiliation, economic hardship, and the sense of being reduced from superpower to supplicant. The social fabric of Russia frayed dramatically during the 1990s. The collapse of the old system brought economic hardship and profound disorientation. The certainties of the Soviet era, guaranteed employment, free healthcare, a powerful national identity, were gone, replaced by a brutal, competitive reality that many were unprepared for. Life expectancy for men plummeted, a sign of rising alcoholism and a collapsing public health system. Organized crime flourished in the vacuum. Mafias controlled local businesses and extorted protection money. Violent turf wars erupted on Moscow and St. Petersburg streets. For many, freedom had become chaos. The decade was a study in stark contrasts. Tiny elites flaunted wealth with imported cars and lavish Moscow nightclubs. Meanwhile, millions, military officers, factory workers, pensioners, struggled to survive. National pride hit an all-time low. The military was underfunded and demoralized after Chechnya. The country that had once launched Sputnik, defeated Nazism, now seemed adrift. On New Year's Eve 1999, Boris Yeltsin stunned the world by announcing his resignation, handing power to his little-known prime minister, a former KGB officer named Vladimir Putin. Putin's first promise was simple and powerful. He would restore order. Freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, freedom of the mass media, property rights. His primary mission was the restoration of the power vertical, top-down authority centered in the Kremlin. His rise marked a decisive turning point, away from 1990s disarray towards centralized control. One of his first moves was to rein in the oligarchs who dominated the Yeltsin years. Businessmen could keep their wealth, but they had to stay out of politics. Those who challenged the Kremlin, like Mikhail Khodorkovsky, were targeted. Khodorkovsky was arrested in 2003. Yukos was broken up. He spent a decade in prison. Other oligarchs fell in line or fled the country, or had assets seized by the state. The campaign was popular with the public, seen as justice for 1990s excesses and proof the state was stronger than the individual. Simultaneously, Putin consolidated political power. He abolished direct election of regional governors, making them Kremlin appointees. He brought major TV networks under state control. New laws tightened restrictions on NGOs receiving foreign funding, labeling many foreign agents. Elections and parties stayed in place, but space for real opposition and independent media narrowed. The state, not the individual, became the primary actor in Russian life. This consolidation coincided with remarkable economic recovery driven by soaring oil and gas prices. Living standards rose for a broad segment of the population. Pensions and state salaries were paid on time. New construction transformed city skylines. A growing middle class emerged. For many, the trade-off was clear: less political freedom for stability and prosperity. Putin's approval ratings soared, cementing his status as the indispensable leader of a resurgent nation. With his authority firmly established at home, Vladimir Putin turned his attention to restoring Russia's influence on the world stage. The foreign policy of the new Russia rejected the subservience of the 1990s and adopted a more assertive posture. Putin called the Soviet collapse the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the century. Not a call to restore the USSR, but a statement. Russia would not accept a unipolar world. It would demand respect and defend interests in its near abroad. Assertiveness shown through diplomacy, economic leverage, and military force. Energy reserves were used as foreign policy, rewarding allies and punishing adversaries. Russia strongly opposed NATO's eastward expansion. Open conflict erupted in 2008 with the war in Georgia and escalated from 2014 in Ukraine. The annexation of Crimea in 2014 was a watershed moment, celebrated domestically but condemned internationally. Domestically, Putin's rule became intertwined with a narrative of national revival. The state promoted Russian history, traditional values, and the Orthodox Church. Victory in World War II, the Great Patriotic War, became central to identity, with massive Victory Day parades on Red Square. The ideology framed Russia as a distinct civilization opposed to a hostile West. From 1991's chaos to 2025's assertive state, power was reorganized. The Soviet Empire is gone, and communist ideology is a relic. A new system rose, a market economy with strong state control, formal institutions with centralized authority, and deep-seated nationalism with global ambition. Questions from the fall of the Berlin Wall evolved into today's moment. History doesn't repeat, it reorganizes. Putin's Russia may be the Soviet Union reborn under new colors. Subscribe to Timeless Hub, where history explains today.